Hello, and welcome to today's ACM SIGSOFT webinar. This webcast is part of the ACM SIGSOFT commitment to provide value to its current and future members. The ACM SIGSOFT webinar series features speakers from the Future of Software Engineering track at the International Conference of Software Engineering, as well as select keynote speakers and distinguished paper authors. I am Pekka Abrahamsson, Professor of Software Engineering at the University of Jyväskylä in Finland, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly mention a few housekeeping items shown on the slide in front of you. First, the slides will advance automatically throughout the event. On the bottom panel, you will find a number of additional widgets and resources. If you are experiencing problems with the slides or audio, press the F5 key in Windows, Command+R on a Mac, or refresh the browser on mobile devices. Or you can close and relaunch the presentation. To control volume, adjust the master volume on your computer. If you have questions during this webinar, please type them into the Q&A box at any time during the webinar and click the Submit button. At the end of the presentation, we will have time to respond to the questions. The session will be recorded and will be archived. You will receive an automatic email notification when it becomes available. Today's presentation is Use Case 2.0, the Hub of Modern Software Development by Ivar Jacobson. Ivar Jacobson received his PhD in computer science from KTH, Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden. Ivar has authored 10 books, published more than 100 papers, and is a frequent keynote speaker at conferences around the world. Ivar is the father of components and component architecture, work that was adopted by Ericsson and resulted in the greatest commercial success story ever in the history of Sweden. He is also one of the 3 original developers of the unified modeling language. Much later, Ivar founded his current company, Ivar Jacobson International, which since 2004 has been focusing on using methods and tools in a smart and super light agile way. This work resulted in that Ivar became a founder and a leader of the worldwide network CMAT, which has the mission to revolutionize software development based on kernel of software engineering. The kernel has been realized as a formal OMG standard called Essence. I have personally known Ivar for more than 10 years. It's truly an honor to be here together with Ivar. So Ivar, without further ado, please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Pekka. Yes, I'm very excited to be part of this seminar and to talk about work that has gone on for many years and now resulted in a new way of looking upon use cases. First I have to tell you that I have got a terrible cold, so I may get a cough attack. And that's why I have here on my side Rolly Stimson, a colleague of mine in my company. He will jump in if I will not be able to talk, but I won't let him be in long because I really enjoy talking to you. So let's see. So that is the abstract. You, by the way, get access to the slides afterwards. So agile use cases or use case 2, they are everywhere. They're used in all domains, such as industrial internet, self-driving cars, and cloud computing. The term use case has been adopted for talking about basically what you expect the software is going to do. So in that sense, it's used in an informal way, has become a normal English word. It impacts everyone. So it's a common language that unifies how clients talk to development and to operations. Partners sales, marketing, and support. People understand it intuitively, and then it also has a formal meaning, which makes it efficient to use when you actually develop software and in operations. And everything they do, it drives and coordinates the work across all disciplines and across business systems, hardware, and software. It's truly got a much wider usage than ever expected it, not the least by me. So I'll give you a very brief history of use cases. The first time I actually came up with that term and to write about it was back in 1986. I wrote a paper, tried to get it accepted at Uppsala, but it was rejected. So I came back 1 year later with the same paper with some clarification, and this time it was accepted. And since then, it went quite soon viral, in particular when we wrote the book about object-oriented software engineering, a use case-driven approach. And it has been used and improved by many people over the years. There are hundreds of books about use cases. But when Agile make entrance in around 2000, people consider use cases not agile. And I had a hard time to understand it first, but and the reason was that we actually used it in many cases in a similar way as we talk about now. In use case 2.0, it's as agile as anything, and it is applied all over. So I can just tell you that at that time when I came up with the concept, I was still an employee of Ericsson. I tried to interest Ericsson for it, but the answer I got of the key players, which were actually my colleagues and best friends, were, but Ivar, is nothing really new in this. So it is not easy to sell new concepts and get them adopted. It took me many years, not until the book was written, that I could convince Ericsson to use it. But then they used it all over. So what is it that made use case so popular? So they very effectively communicate what the system is supposed to do. Meaning, you don't need a big picture. You need a big picture. That big picture is very simple, and it includes a number of use cases, and that these use cases will describe what the whole system is doing. So you get very simple, in a very simple way, a big picture. You get the requirements into the context of specific users' goals. They are the test cases. They have always been the test cases. So in a way, it has very much similarities with test-driven design, or test-driven development, and so on. They also been applied as a way to design user experiences, because a use case is in a way a user experience. And for instance, like Konstantin wrote a book, Software for Use, which is based on use cases. And they are driving the development through design and code. You start identify use cases, you design them, you code them, and you test them. So here is this picture shows that use cases. This is a use case centric approach. Of course, there are other ways of describing things, but use cases are actually playing a role in many activities: requirements, designing architecture, design, test, user experience design, business modeling, iteration planning, and software use. And there are books written about it with me and people in my team to help. There are other books as well. So they are key for support the whole life cycle. They are very light as user stories, or can be light as user stories, and they are also, we get the value of do simple models. The new way of describing use cases or describing any practice is by using poker-sized cards. And use cases is described that way. These cards are used for many things, and of course to play games, serious games, that help the team to collaborate. Where every such card represents a placeholder for conversation. And in Agile, we stimulate people by having such placeholders for conversation. People talk about it, they discuss it, and get engaged. There are also, of course, the deeper descriptions of what these cards really mean, available on websites that we have in my company. And there is a little book, a PDF book. It's actually translated to a couple of other languages. I think it's Spanish and Dutch. I would be surprised if it's not also German. As I said, we are using these cards and so on. That is actually a standard. It's a standard developed by OMG, and this standard has tell you how to make these cards and how to write practices. The beauty of this is that the standard includes a common ground, a kernel, something that includes the forever essential elements that you talk about when you describe a practice. And that means we are reusing a lot. So describing new practice is fundamentally simpler than it was in the past. Here is, for example, the standard, as we call it, activity spaces. You can see that the use case 2.0 have something to say in the activity space, understand the requirements. But it has nothing to say in implement the system. So it doesn't help with actually the coding, but it helps with the testing, and it helps with the how you shape the architecture of a system. There are two books written about this. One is the top, it's called The Essence of Software Engineering. That book came out in 2014. It was intended for practitioners, but at that time, the world had really not adopted Essence. So that became, let's say, not what we had hoped. We had hoped for a bestseller. However, now, just a week or two ago, a new book was published called The Essentials of Modern Software Engineering. And it has a subtitle, Free the Practices from the Method Prisons. That has to be explained, but not now. The book has been used at 4 universities for a full semester, and all 4 universities have written a report, and basically these reports summarize by saying, whatever I've done in the past is history. Now when I move forward, I'm going to teach software engineering the Essence way. So we have high expectations that universities will pick it up, and not only universities, because if you are an experienced practitioner and you read this book, you will see a beauty that you never have seen with all these methods out there. This is just a mess of methods and practices. The same practice is described differently if it's used in one method than in another method, and so on. That is just confusing to everybody and doesn't lead to that we grow our knowledge about how to do the job. So, what is new? A use case is still a use case. We defined in an informal way. You should know that it's a formal mathematical description of use case, but informally it is all the ways of using a system to achieve a particular goal for a particular user. So they also you can use use cases in diagrams to describe a big picture. Here you see a very simple one. It's the use case withdraw cash in a banking system, and it has a customer, bank customer. Of course, there are many other users and there are many other use cases, but even a very large system may have only 10 to 15 use cases. So you get a very good big picture very quickly. Now I talk about use cases that are of value. There may be other ways of using use cases, but this is the normal case. We describe the use cases as narratives, and they tell the story of how the system and its user work together to achieve a particular goal. The use case modeling, to have such a simple model, is a very simple idea. And it is to get to the heart of what the system must do. What you should focus on, or what will use it, and then look at what the system must do for them to help them achieve something useful. There are 6 principles, and I will go through them each one separately, but just to, you see the list here, keep it simple to telling stories, understand the big picture, focus on value, build the system in slices, deliver the system in increments, and adapt to meet the team's and the client's needs. These are the 6 first principles. Look at the first one. Keep it simple by telling stories. Make requirements understandable and testable by telling stories. So if you look at the picture further down, and here is an example. It's about the ATM machine. This is the most used example in the literature to show any kind of use case or user story and so on. And so you insert the card, you validate and so on. This is the normal case you have to the left, the happy day scenario. But then there are alternative flows that when you insert the card, for instance, you may have an invalid card. And all these are different stories. So use cases provide a way to identify and capture all the different but related stories in a simple but comprehensive way. So if you do user stories only, if you don't have an overriding concept like a use case, how do you find and how do you know that you have all of them? Whereas with a use case, you break it down like this, identify all the different paths. The second principle, understand the big picture. So here is a use case diagram. You have the users outside the system, and inside the system you have the use cases. And it gives you an overview of the whole system. When you start designing something, starting from a picture which you basically create in a room with people that are interested in and knowledgeable about what is going to be built. Within a couple of hours, I've done this many times, you can have a picture that is understandable and people feel they understand. Then you break it down into smaller pieces and so on, like stories. We should focus on value. So, of course, every use case should provide a particular value. When does the story end? When the value is fulfilled. So that is goes basically without saying. Use cases are useful cases, not useless cases. That is, of course, also, but it is a rule. Many people have come up with useless cases, so we're not going to do that. Here we have a little bigger use case model, as we call it. We see here users. This is it's an ATM system, I think. You can buy tickets, you can withdraw cash, you can transfer funds, and you can manage account, and so on. So all the ovals are use cases. And when you build it in releases, iterations, for instance. And you start with the black one. The black one you do break into machine is that use case. And the black release, the first release, includes break into machine. It also includes something from purchase tickets and withdraw cash and refill. So there are pieces from many use cases in one single release. And then you go on to the next release, the blue one, light blue, and now this time you get the short device with funds, and you have something in managed account. So some new use cases are getting introduced with every release, and some are completed in a release, and some are developed in the release. You also find maybe, for instance, this purchase goods. This is an out-of-scope use case. So in this way, you build up what you want to build. If you have too many stories for a single increment, you split it in iterations or sprints. So for instance, the first use case here has in the first releasable or first increment, the first iteration, first sprint, you have a little of a red functionality. In the next, you have a little of a green, and you have a little of a red, more of a red. Now the red is always there, already there, yeah. So you add a little of a green to use case one. In the next, in that release, you also do something in use case two. And and in the third iteration, sprint, you have already done something in use case one. You have done something in use case two. Now you add something into use case three, and so on. What you do is you slice up the use case to provide stories suitable for iterative development, Kanban or Scrum. So just to summarize, we slice up the use cases to drive a development. If you think about the whole use case as a one to the left, and it is too big to develop in a single release, it is described by a set of structured stories, and it has a set of matching test cases. The use case slice is another concept. So the use case is sliced in a number of meaningful use case slices. Everyone gives value. If it doesn't give value, you have probably sliced it in a strange way. So use case slice is a meaningful part of a use case. And you take a number of the stories and go forward and implement it. And you go through with the use. It's not only used for requirements, these use cases, but actually the slice is not only specified, but also goes through design, implementation, and test. So here's an example. You have a use case. This is another case. You have a shopper, and there is a use case 7, browse and shop. And you have a number of properties. Priority is must, release 1, size very large, complexity high. So you slice it into 3 yellow. So each one of the yellow is a slice. And these are then that you drive through implementation, through design and implementation and test. So you can capture them on post-it notes and work very light and, as people say, agile. So here's how you build the system in slices. It should be built in slices, each of which has clear values to the user. So you start with identify a slice in its use case model, the whole use case model. You design it, implement it, you test it. So it's seamless all over the 3-4 different whatever activities you have. Deliver the system in increments. This is the 5th principle. It's similar to what I already said. Use case 1 has a red thing, a red functionality that is in slice 1.1, and you go further to next use case, and in the next increment you have a slice 1.2 from use case 1 and a slice 2.1 from use case 2. Each increment builds on the previous increment to add more functionality or improve the quality of what has come before. And finally, principle 6, adapt to meet the team's and the client's need. So here you can see the different work products in use case driven development, in use case 2.0. You have a use case model, and you can see the use case model, use case narrative, use case realization, test case, and supporting information. And then you can have different depth. So you can have, if you look at the use case narrative, it can be briefly described, it can have a bulleted outline, it can have an essential outline, which means there is a little bit description of every little bullet, and it can be fully described. And the reason is that clients have many different kinds of systems. So in the past, people misused use cases, and they did far too much descriptions. And I mean, I was horrified when I came into big banks, for instance, and saw that they had written use cases on several hundred pages for a system. And that was done by people who had no clue about how to implement it. And this is totally different. You can have any level, as little as you just have write on some card something, or you have, for more critical system, you have a more full description. So different situations require different approaches. If we to the left, with y-axis, you talk about how close access do you have to subject matter expert. If you have them every day or every year, and the other x-axis has about the severity of error. If you just loss of face or loss of life, and here you have 4 different quadrants. In the lightest form, you have lightweight requirements and lots of conversations because you have a subject matter expert close and the risk of failure is not so high. And in the top right, you have detailed requirements with formal traceability and formal testing. That is for severe when you have very little access to a system expert and the risk of loss of life is high. So where does the different approaches fit in? User stories fit in very well in the lightweight requirements and lots of conversation. That is where it's best being used, should be used. The use cases are all over. You can use use cases as light as you use user stories, but you can scale. So if, for instance, you build a product that you really don't know how successful it will be, and you find out it's very successful, you need more. So you can easily manage the further development. This slide shows the difference. I will not go through everything here. It's more for you to look at afterwards. But we have, to the right column, we have descriptions of what added value use cases give. And it's on every column here, every row, it adds value over just using user stories. Just take an example. If we take, go to the right column and the third box there, the added value over having small stories and slices is that things like epics, themes, stories, and user types brought together into one easily understood model. So all these extras to user stories that are additional elements are treated within the context of a use case model. So it's a more covering element, a more covering construct than just using one of them, user story. And so it goes on like that. There are definition of done, for instance. When you talk about user story, you never know when you have got all the stories. When it's use cases, the model defines the whole system. So it's easy to identify all the use cases and flows. So if you have a use case and finding the slices, which are basically stories too, you break down the use case into smaller pieces. It's a very systematic way of doing it. If you start in the other way from user stories, when are you done? When have you found all of them? That is a much harder problem to solve. So that is the difference. And when it comes to agility, this is about the lightness. Since every work product has 4 levels of detail, briefly described, bulleted outline, essential outline, fully described. And then you can use it for different purpose. For instance, if you only have briefly described, It's just for basic scope management. And you have a lot of discussions about the requirements. If you have fully support, fully described, then you can easily create user documentation. You have high fidelity for making estimations, and of course, analysis and design, implementation, and test are supported. So it's truly a scalable solution. From here, you start with simple costs. You have a use case, browse and shop. Slice one, select and buy one product. So that is one card. Then you have a conversation and test cases for confirmation. If you have a larger systems with documented use case narratives to complement the slices. Then you have a use case model, use case narratives, and you have these slices for each use case. So here are 3 use cases with a number of slices. So then you have scaled up to more larger system, or where you need more documentation because of severity. You can use it for distributed teams with fully described use cases, and you can handle system of systems with recursive use case models. So you have a use case model for the system of systems, and then you have use case model for individual systems in the systems of systems. It's a little hard to follow this, but I hope you get it. So getting started is easy. You only need to model what is important to you. So here you have this use case model. This is a card. It's presented on a poker-sized card. It has 3 different levels on the card. You can have value details, value established, system boundary established, and it's structured. And then to get started, you only need 1 use case and 1 slice. So you can start very quickly making 1 use case and only 1 slice in that use case. The use case model provides a big picture needed for effective scope management and release planning. Let's see what we have in practice here. The use case 2 practice is summarized on a set of cards. Here are 2 very important concepts in use case model. We have use case and use case slice. They are key concepts that you want to follow and move from state to state. So for instance, the use case, it can go from goal established to story structure understood, and so on. So these are states that the use case go through. And even these are in every iteration or sprint, you go through these kinds of states. How far are we with the use case? And the same thing with use case slice. It has been scoped, so we know how big it is. It's prepared, analyzed, implemented, and verified. For each one of these states, there is a checklist. So, and these checklists are wonderful because people get something to talk about. So they are what we call placeholders for conversation. I have seen people become super engaged in a team by discussing, have we reached this state or not? And in that way, you can see the progress. Definition of done is well defined. when you use these cards. So these are these are two of the cards. Then and they are the key concepts. Then you have in this practice you have 5 activities: find actors and use cases, slice the use case, and so on. On these cards, you see the activity is this thing you see here, which is like a big arrow turning downwards. And it specifies what competence you need to have to do this activity. This is a quite large activity. Can require many people involved. And then you have a work product, the use case model, use case narrative, use case realization. Use case realization is beyond requirements, because this is to show how you actually implement the use case, and use case test case. So these are the cards that you get with the use case. So now you use these cards to basically play games, serious games with the team, and get the team engaged and actually passionate about what they are doing. So these slices make great backlog items. You have a backlog, for instance, if you use Scrum, and here are these use case slices, and some of them have been done, and here are where will be done next, and where the team will finish is somewhere between this and that. This is as if it were user stories or something else. So it works perfectly well with backlog-driven development. Also with one-piece flow, Kanban, for instance. And the slices are in this chain of activities. Some of them are ongoing, some of them are done, and some of them are live. So even here, use cases and Kanban are great partners. Yeah, this is another selling slide. I am little sorry I have to bring up these, but of course, use cases have so many values, and it's important to understand them. So we help customers, managers get value, developers, as we have talked about, technical writers, of course, testers, user experience designers, and analysts. All of them get some value. We are not the only technique you will use cases and use case slices. You also will use complementary techniques, such as practices for stakeholder analysis to understand the business value, and specification by example. You can use these practices in combination with use cases, and facilitation and elicitation. There you have model storming, simulation, story mapping, and so on. So let me wrap up now. Use case 2.0 solve many problems, and I leave it for you to read on your own. But it is there are so many problems with other techniques that you can get solved by using use case. And it doesn't mean, just to be clear, it doesn't mean if you have used user story for a long time, it doesn't mean that you have to throw away anything you have done. You just complement the user stories with use cases and put them in slices. So the step to go to use case 2.0, if you have used user stories, is very small. This is a slide you can use if you want to show others the principles. I've already talked about these. There are 6 principles. Keep it simple by telling stories. Focus on value. Deliver the system in increments. Understand the big picture. Build the system in slices. Adapt to the teams and the client's needs. You know, we have to think about the client, not only the team. It's applicable for all types of systems. It's not just for user-intensive applications. It's been used for developing infrastructure, for developing, I mentioned Internet of Things. Use cases are all over in the Internet of Things place. And so there's even things like compilers have been built using use cases. It's broad. It's not just for software development, also for systems in general, including hardware and software. All types of requirements, functional, non-functional infrastructure. Most of the non-functional requirements are specific for use case. So they're coupled to use cases. All kinds of development approaches, backlog-driven iterative, such as Scrum, Kanban, or also the old, what we call old, but still there are many people using waterfall. It works there too. And for all kinds of sourcing models, co-located, distributed, outsourced development. So where can you find more? There is a new website, usecase.ivarjacobson.com, where you will find, it's a home for all things about use case too. You can find an ebook, you can find case studies, videos, papers, and e-learning. And you can also find the use case 2 practice content available. You can find all the cards, you can print the cards if you want. And there is a new e-learning that has been developed together with a big US bank. And so you can get, you can actually go and learn about use case 2 on the web, and you can be certified. So, time for questions.
All right. Thank you, Ivar, for the very nice presentation. We have received many questions, and let's start with a question from Mark. How does a use case in the context of poker card approach differ from the concept of a user story in the Agile DevOps world?
You know, the approach to describe a practice is not shouldn't really change the intent of a practice. So user stories are also described using cards. You can find them on our website, as far as I know. And so user stories and use cases and Scrum and now Scrum at Scale and DAD are all essentialized or being essentialized.
Okay. Next question.
So basically, let me just say one sentence more. Basically,
sure.
Essence powers all practices. Any practice you have will be like Jeff Sutherland says about Scrum. Essence makes it Scrum a better practice.
So Rolly here, just to say, Ivar, while you were talking, since we're getting a lot of questions and some of them quite concrete and technical, I've been doing my best to answer some of them through the app as we go. But carry on, Pekka. I'm sure people would like to hear Ivar's responses as well.
I hope we are on the same You make it difficult for me, Rolly.
Andre is asking regarding the non-functional requirements, and his question goes, how does the specification of non-functional requirements such as performance or security fit into this new paradigm with use case 2.0?
So actually that has been with use cases since its beginning. There is a special section on every use case, where you describe a non-functional requirements. For instance, response times and how many people, how many records you have, and so on. A maximum. So it describes and how many times per second do you need to perform this use case. So that has always been there as an addition, because they actually belong to use case and not to some generic. Of course, then there are specific generic requirements, generic non-functional requirements that are true for the whole system. And that is, of course, specified separately. But a lot of requirements are actually, non-functional requirements are actually use case specific.
All right. Jeff is asking about the actual physical cards. He says that I see that the PDF of Essence cards is available. Is a PDF of the use case cards also available? And I think that you referred to this one at the end of the presentation.
Yes, they are available.
And is this from the website of Ivar Jacobson International?
It is, and it is on the practice library. Rolly is the man who actually have developed the user story practice and the use case practice and put it on the web.
All right.
So he can, if there's anything, yeah.
Yeah.
On.
So
all right.
yeah, on the practice library, we have got PDF cards available for a number of practices. Yes.
Excellent. And now that you, Ivar, know very well Bergen Meyer, so one question from Gene actually goes, have you read Bergen Meyer's Agile, the Good, the Hype, and the Ugly? And what did you think of it? And what do you think of formal methods in more general?
First, I really love the book. However, every book has, of course, some weaknesses, and it's subjective to say this is a weakness. Burton has never really understood use cases, so he doesn't like user stories or use cases or anything like that. What was your second question? Follow-up question.
What do you think of
formal
methods?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, I love formal technique as long as it is intuitive and easy to use to people. To most formal methods, I myself work with formal methods, and it is the problem is to get people, developers, to really adopt it. So we need to find formal methods where the formality is hidden and not in the face of people who use it.
All right. Thank you. Go. A question from Go is like this. Use case slice seems to serve for the same purpose of what you called use case extension. Would he be correct if he would say that?
No. A use case extension is something you want to add to an existing use case. So there are similarities in how you treat it, but the idea is that you should be able to describe the system in terms of a number of core use cases, and then you can make extensions to these core use cases. And usually when you make an extension, you are not only adding something to the existing use cases, but you're also probably having some new use cases that use the extension. So it's two different purposes, but the way you implement it can very well be similar.
All right, thank you. A question from Jeffrey. It seems to me that there's an interesting relationship between the use cases and jobs to be done, which is perhaps more focused on discovering new needs and opportunities. What do you think?
That I didn't understand, frankly speaking. Say it again, please.
I think that we will move on to the next question, and it comes from Mark. How does UML 2.0 fit with UML sec, or I guess UML security, or vice versa?
How UML 2.0 fit? No, UML 2.0 fit with what?
Yeah, how does UML 2.0 fit with UML security? I guess perhaps he's referring to use case 2.0 with UML sec. Or if perhaps I still have many questions. So as you have been working with telecom industry, Hongwei is asking that if you would know any good reference books on software engineering exactly fitting into telecom industry domain.
No, I don't know any.
Perhaps your
that
newest
doesn't
book
mean
would also
it
fit
doesn't
in.
mean yeah, it doesn't mean that it doesn't. There is not something like that, but I could say that the new book has one chapter about use cases. It's quite a big chapter, and another chapter about user stories, so you can see how they relate to one another.
All right, thank you so much. I think that we are running out of the time, so I think I would like to thank Ivar again for his informative presentation and insightful answers. Special thanks to each of you for taking time to attend and participate in today's webinar. This webinar was recorded and will be made available online in a few days at sigsoft.org/resources/webinars. You can find announcements on upcoming ACM and SIGSOFT webinars and other ACM activities at learning.acm.org and sigsoft.org. Now, on the behalf of SIGSOFT, the speaker, and myself, thanks again for joining us, and hope you will join us again in the future. This concludes today's webinar.
Thank you very much.